1902, in a blacksmith shop in Leavenworth, Kansas, a 13-year-old apprentice picked up a worn-out farrier's file, a tool other men had already thrown away, and turned it into a knife. It wore no brand. It used no special steel. It carried nothing resembling a $300 price tag, and it held an edge longer than almost anything the local farmers handed him to sharpen. The boy was named Hoytbuck. More than a century later, the family name he left behind sells knives that run $200 and more. But here is the line the catalog will never print. The cheapest knife in the entire Buck lineup, the one that sells for about $35, is built on the exact idea that 13-year-old discovered with a piece of scrap, that a knife is never the sum of what you paid for it. It is the sum of what somebody already solved long before you ever walked into the store. There is a quiet belief that runs through the hunting world, that the price of a blade measures the blade, that a $200 knife must field dress an elk $200 better than a $15 one. The people who have actually knelt over that elk in the dark know better. And so, it turns out, does the science. What follows is a countdown of 8 hunting knives that almost nobody buys on purpose. Knives that cost $12, $20, $40, and quietly outlast blades 5 and 10 times their price. But this is not a shopping list. It is an investigation into one uncomfortable idea, that when you buy one of these cheap knives, you are not buying something cheap at all. You are buying a design that stopped needing to prove itself a century ago, sometimes 4 centuries ago. The research was paid for by men who are now dust. The expensive knife, more often than not, is selling you something newer, less tested, and wrapped in a flattering story about the kind of hunter you imagine yourself to be. Bernard Levine has spent 50 years pulling those stories apart. He wrote Levine's Guide to Knives and Their Values. The book collectors simply call the Bible, and his life's work has been correcting the myths that cutlery companies tell about their own past. Keep him in mind as we count down, because nearly everything that matters here lives in the part the marketing quietly leaves out. And there is a second voice you should keep close, because the loudest myth in this whole trade is a myth about metal. When we reach the knife that finally cracks the case open, it will not be a knife collector who does it. It will be a metallurgist with a laboratory, a testing machine, and a stack of results that do not care what the box says. For now, start at the bottom of the price chart, where the truth is usually hiding in plain sight. Number 8, the cold steel fin bear, $12, maybe $15, about the price of 2 sandwiches. On the surface, it is nothing. A plain blade, a molded handle, a knife most collectors would not glance at twice. But look at the shape, and you are looking at something very old. The fin bear is a modern echo of the Scandinavian belt knife, the puukko, a working pattern that fishermen and woodsmen in the far north settled on generations before anyone thought to sell it. A straight spine, a simple bevel, a point that steers. The design was finished long ago. Cold Steel did not invent it. They mass-produced it. And that is the whole trick of a $12 knife that works. It is cheap because it is inherited. Nobody had to fund a laboratory to arrive at that blade. The field trials ended before the American Revolution. What you are paying $12 for is not the knife. It is the injection molding. The idea came free, carried down inside the memory of a trade older than the country you are hunting in. Number 7, the old Timer Sharpfinger, $20 to $25, and one of the most recognizable skinning blades ever pressed into American hands. That upswept clip point, the narrow belly, the way it turns inside a body cavity without punching through hide. That shape first appeared in a Schrade catalog in 1973. For half a century, it has caped small game and skinned deer in tight quarters, and hunters keep reaching for it, not because it is refined, but because the pattern simply works. Now hold on to Bernard Levine's warning, because here is a spot where the marketing blurs the truth. The original Sharpfinger was built in Ellenville, New York, out of 1075 carbon steel. In 2004, Schrade went bankrupt, the Ellenville factory closed its doors, and the name was sold. The $20 Sharpfinger you buy today is an import, ground from a budget stainless, not the American carbon knife of the old catalogs. The USA-made version, in the traditional steel, exists again only as a small batch revival, and it costs closer to $80. So which one is the real Sharpfinger? Both are. Because the thing that survived every bankruptcy, every change of owner, every change of steel, was never the metal. It was the shape. a drawing from 1973 that outlived the company that drew it. Number 6. The Outdoor Edge RazorLite, around $25, and built on an idea so obvious it took the industry decades to accept it. You never sharpen it. When the edge dulls, you press a button, the blade drops out, and a fresh one clicks in. In a single season, real hunters have run one handle through 8 elk, 3 mule deer, and a pair of antelope, swapping blades instead of stopping to hone. Notice what has happened here. For 100 years, the hunting knife told you that sharpening was a skill, a right, a mark of the serious woodsman. The RazorLite quietly answers, what if it did not have to be? What if the edge were disposable and the tool around it were the thing you kept? It is not a better steel. It is a better question. And it costs $25 precisely because the engineering went into the mechanism, the lock, the swap, and not into a premium blade you would grind away anyway. The expensive knife asks you to protect its edge. This one hands you a new edge and tells you to get back to work. Number 5. The Havalon Piranta, $40 to $50, and the sharpest hunting knife most people will ever hold. For a reason almost nobody guesses. It did not come from a knife company. It came from an operating room. Havalon began as a division of Haval, a maker of surgical scalpel blades for the medical trade, and the Piranta is, almost literally, a scalpel with a hunting handle bolted on. The blade is so fine that hunters have opened their own thumbs to the bone and been told by the doctor that stitches might do more harm than the cut itself. Field dress 2 deer on one blade, then snap in another. Here is the decode. The best skinning edge in the woods was not developed for the woods at all. It was perfected over decades in hospitals, where a dull or ragged blade is not an inconvenience. It is a danger to a patient on a table. Havalon simply carried a solved problem across an industry line. That is the pattern you keep meeting at the bottom of the price chart. The cheapest tools are often the ones standing on the tallest pile of somebody else's finished work. One warning the veterans pass down. Run the thicker replacement blades, not the thinnest, or that surgical edge will snap under a heavy twist. Number 4. The Condor Bushlore, $35 to $45. A full-tang, high-carbon bushcraft knife with a leather sheath, at a price that makes serious knife people suspicious. Hunters who own $200 blades describe picking up a Bushlore and going quiet because it arrives sharper and sits better in the hand than knives they paid 5 times as much for. It runs on 1075 carbon steel, a simple, tough alloy, and it is made in El Salvador. And that last fact is exactly where the story gets misremembered. You will hear the Bushlore's maker traced to a German company founded in 1787 in Solingen, the old cutlery capital of the world. That is true, but it has been compressed almost into a myth. The name is J. Bruder Weiersberg, not the garbled spelling the internet passes around. And Condor Tool and Knife, as a brand, did not exist until 2004. What actually happened is better than the legend. In 1964, that Solingen lineage built a factory in Santa Ana, El Salvador, filled it with German machinery, and sent local workers back to Solingen to train. So the Bushlore is not a cheap knife pretending to be German. It is Solingen's actual industrial knowledge, relocated. And the reason it costs $40 instead of $200 is a factory in Central America, not a compromise in the craft. The heritage is real. It just took a boat before the final 3. The knives that make this whole argument impossible to ignore. One note. Everything being verified here. The dates, the steals, the bankruptcies, the heat treat records is laid out in the Lost American Arms Field dossier for this episode. A documented timeline, a published specification table for every blade on the list, and the sources behind each claim. The code on your screen carries you straight to it, and it costs you nothing. It is, frankly, more than most channels put in the video itself. Now, the top 3. Number 3. The ESEE Izula II, around $70. The most expensive knife on this list, and the one that quietly reframes what the word expensive even means. It is a bare slab of 1095 carbon steel, full tang from tip to pommel, with almost nothing added. No saw teeth, no blood groove, no gadget. The name comes from the bullet ant of the Peruvian jungle, because the company was born there, running survival courses with the Peruvian Air Force before it ever sold a blade. The knives are made in Idaho by Rowan Manufacturing under a heat treat the company guards as its own. And then there is the warranty. If an Izula ever breaks, in use, in misuse, it does not matter. ESEE repairs it or replaces it. No receipt, no questions. And the coverage follows the knife to whoever owns it next, anywhere on Earth, for as long as it exists. Think about what that says about price. A knife you can hand to your grandson that its maker will still stand behind when you are gone for $70. The premium blade asks you to insure it. This one insures itself and outlasts the argument. Number 2. The BuckLite Max II, $30 to $40, made in America, from a company that also sells hunting knives at $200. And this is where the whole countdown finally shows its hand. The BuckLite runs on 420HC steel. In the wider knife world, 420HC is considered budget, a plain stainless, the kind reviewers dismiss on paper. So how does a $30 buck hold an edge that embarrasses knives with far fancier steel? For that answer, we go to Dr. Laren Thomas, a metallurgist who earned a doctorate in the science of steel and has spent his career testing, under laboratory conditions, the very claims knife companies print on their boxes. Thomas's work confirms what Buck's own history only whispered. Buck's late master heat treater, Paul Boz, developed a process, a deep cryogenic quench, chilling the finished blade far below zero. That pushes ordinary 420HC well past the same steel from any other maker. And here's the part that overturns the entire price myth. The alloy stamped on a blade is only one ingredient. What actually decides whether a knife holds its edge is the heat treatment and the geometry. How the steel is cooked and how thin the edge is ground. A cheap steel, treated correctly, beats an expensive steel treated carelessly. Every single time. Thomas is honest about the limits, and so are we. This budget steel will not outcut a true premium alloy on raw edge retention. It gives up ground there, and no heat treat erases that. What it does instead is exactly what a hunter needs. It takes an edge on any stone in the field, it shrugs off rust, and it bends where a harder, prouder blade would chip and break. So walk back through every knife on this list with that in your hand. The 400 years behind the Mora, the 1973 drawing behind the Sharpfinger, the scalpel line behind the Havalon. Not one of them is cheap because someone cut a corner. They are cheap because the hard part was already finished. It was never the price of the steel. In the end, it was never even the steel. It was what a man in a workshop knew how to do to it. Number 1. And after all of that, the best answer on this entire list costs about $15. The Morakniv Companion. A thin Scandinavian blade, a rubber handle, a plastic sheath. A knife so plain it looks like it belongs in a hardware aisle, not at the top of a countdown. But it comes from Mora, a region in Sweden that has been making knives for more than 400 years, long before the United States existed. Its edge is a simple Scandi grind, the easiest edge in the world to bring back on a flat stone, and the carbon versions arrive sharper than knives 3 times the price. And there is a small, perfect irony buried in its history. The man who founded Morakniv had spent 4 years working as a lumberjack in North America before he went home to Sweden and started making blades. The neighbor who became his great rival first meant to emigrate to America himself. The most trusted cheap knife in the American backcountry was shaped, in part, by 2 Swedes who dreamed of this continent. 400 years of quiet refinement sold for the price of lunch. That is not a bargain. That is an inheritance. Go back to that blacksmith shop in Kansas, to the 13-year-old and his worn-out file. He did not have premium steel. He had a problem, an edge that would not hold, and the patience to solve it. Everything on this list is a descendant of that same moment. A shape, a grind, a heat treat that somebody got right and then handed down. The number on the tag measures the marketing, the cost of materials, the story you are being sold. It does not measure the knowledge inside the knife. That was paid for long ago, by other hands, and it is the one thing the expensive blade cannot charge you extra for, because you already own it the moment you understand it. I have stood in a quiet, case-lit room and held a blade that cost almost nothing and was worth more than everything around it, and understood, at last, that the object was never the point. The knowledge that shaped it was. If that is the kind of truth you come here for, the thing itself, not the legend printed on the box, then you already belong here. Subscribe and tell me below. Which cheap knife have you trusted the longest, and what did it teach you? We will keep the honest ones on the table.